Part 1. The Beginning of the End. My name is Alex, and I've always considered myself an ordinary guy. I had an ordinary job, ordinary friends, and an ordinary life. But all of that changed the day I found the old suitcase in my grandmother's attic. Grandma had passed away a few months ago, and as her only grandson, I inherited her house. It was an old but cozy place, filled with memories. I decided to clean out the attic to prepare the house for sale, and that's when I found it, a leather suitcase covered in dust and cobwebs. The suitcase was locked, but the key was right next to it, neatly wrapped in a yellow piece of paper with the words, "For you, Alex." It was strange. Grandma had never mentioned the suitcase to me, and I couldn't figure out why she left it specifically for me. I opened the suitcase, and the first thing I saw was a stack of old letters tied with a ribbon. Beneath them were photographs, some documents, and a gun, an old one but in perfect condition. I'd never held a gun before, and its presence in Grandma's suitcase stunned me. I started with the letters. They were handwritten, and the handwriting was familiar. It was Grandma's. The first letter was dated 1947, and it was addressed to someone named Thomas. The words were filled with emotion, almost desperate. "Thomas, I don't know if this letter will ever reach you, but I have to try. They're watching me. I can't leave the house, and I can't trust anyone. If you're reading this, please come back. I need your help. I can't do this alone." I frowned. Who was Thomas? Grandma had never mentioned anyone by that name. I flipped through the other letters, and they were all similar. Pleas for help, mentions of being watched, and references to something called the Project. But there were no details, no explanations, just a growing sense of fear and urgency. Next, I looked at the photographs. They were old black and white, and most of them showed Grandma as a young woman. But there was one photo that stood out. It was a group of people standing in front of a large building. Grandma was in the center, smiling, but the others, their faces were blurred, as if someone had smudged them out. On the back of the photo, someone had written, "The Team 1946. Never forget what we did." I felt a chill run down my spine. What had they done? And why had Grandma kept all of this hidden? Finally, I picked up the gun. It was heavier than I expected and cold to the touch. As I turned it over my hands, I noticed something engraved on the side. Property of Project Erebus. Project Erebus. The name sent a shiver through me. I'd never heard of it, but it sounded ominous. I set the gun down and reached for the documents at the bottom of the suitcase. They were official-looking, stamped with government seals, and filled with technical jargon. But one phrase kept repeating, "Human experimentation." My heart started to race. Human experimentation? What had Grandma been involved in? And why had she left all of this for me? I was about to dig deeper when I heard a noise downstairs. It was faint, like the creak of a floorboard. I froze, listening. The house was supposed to be empty. I'd locked the doors, and no one else had a key. The noise came again, louder this time. Someone was in the house. I grabbed the gun, my hands trembling. I'd never used one before, but I wasn't about to take any chances. I crept down the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. The living room was dark, the only light coming from the street lamp outside. I scanned the room, but there was no one there. And then I saw it. A shadow moved in the corner of the room, tall and hunched. It didn't make a sound, but I could feel its presence, like a weight pressing down on me. I raised the gun, my finger hovering over the trigger. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaking. The shadow didn't respond. It just stood there, watching me. And then, slowly, it began to move toward me. I fired. The sound was deafening, echoing through the house. The shadow disappeared, and for a moment, everything was silent. I stood there, my hands trembling, the gun still raised. And then I heard it, a voice, faint and distorted, like it was coming from far away. Part 2. The shadow in the house. The voice echoed in my ears long after it had faded. "You shouldn't have opened the suitcase." It wasn't a threat. It was a warning. But from who? And why? I stood frozen in the living room, the gun still in my hand, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. The shadow was gone, but the feeling of being watched lingered. I scanned the room, my eyes darting to every corner, but there was no one there. Just a faint creak of the floorboards, as if the house itself was alive and breathing. I didn't know what to do. My first instinct was to call the police. But what would I say? Hey, there's a shadow in my house, and it told me not to open a suitcase. They'd think I was crazy. And maybe the stress of inheriting the house, of finding the suitcase, had finally gotten to me. But the gun in my hand was real. The suitcase was real. And so was the voice. I took a deep breath and forced myself to move. I locked all the doors and windows, double-checking each one. Then I went back to the attic, where the suitcase still sat open, its contents spilling out like secrets waiting to be uncovered. I needed answers, and the only place to find them was in the suitcase. I sat down on the dusty floor and started going through the documents again. They were filled with technical terms and government jargon, but one phrase kept jumping out at me: Project Erebus, human cognitive enhancement. There were references to experiments, to subjects, to breakthroughs that had been achieved. But there were no details, no names, no locations, just vague descriptions and redacted paragraphs. One document, however, stood out. It was a memo, dated 1946, addressed to someone named Dr. Evelyn Carter. The name sounded familiar, but I couldn't place it. The memo was short and to the point. Dr. Carter, the results of Phase 3 are unacceptable. The subjects are exhibiting severe psychological deterioration, and the risk of exposure is too great. Recommend immediate termination of the project. I felt a chill run down my spine. Termination of the project. Did that mean what I thought it meant? And who was Dr. Evelyn Carter? Was she connected to Grandma? I flipped through the rest of the documents, but there was nothing else about Dr. Carter, just more references to Project Erebus and its experiments. I set the papers aside and picked up the photographs again. The one with the blurred faces caught my eye. I stared at it, trying to make out the details, but the faces were too smudged. All except for Grandma's. She was smiling, but there was something in her eyes, something haunted. And then I noticed something I hadn't seen before. In the background of the photo, barely visible, was a sign on the building. I squinted, tried to read it, but the letters were too blurry. I grabbed my phone and took a picture of the photo, then zoomed in. The letters slowly came into focus. Blackwood Research Facility. Blackwood. The name rang a bell, but I couldn't remember why. I pulled out my laptop and started searching. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Blackwood Research Facility was a government-run lab that had been active in the 1940s. It was located about 2 hours from where I lived, in a remote area surrounded by dense forest. According to the articles I found, the facility had been shut down in 1947 after a tragic accident that resulted in the deaths of several researchers. The details were vague, but one name kept popping up: Dr. Evelyn Carter. I leaned back, my mind racing. Dr. Carter had been the lead researcher at Blackwood, and she disappeared shortly after the facility was shut down. There were rumors that she'd been involved in illegal experiments, but nothing had ever been proven. And now, her name was in Grandma's suitcase. I didn't know what to think. Was Grandma involved in Project Erebus? Was she one of the researchers? And if so, why had she kept it a secret all these years? I was about to dig deeper when I heard it again, the creak of a floorboard. This time, it was coming from the hallway. I grabbed the gun and crept to the door, my heart pounding. The hallway was dark, the only light coming from the attic window. I scanned the shadows, but there was no one there. Just a faint sound of footsteps, moving away from me. I followed the sound, my grip tightening on the gun. The footsteps led me to Grandma's bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, and a faint light was shining from inside. I pushed the door open, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The room was exactly as Grandma had left it. Her bed neatly made, her perfume bottles lined up on the dresser. But in the center of the room, sitting in her favorite armchair, was a shadow. It was tall and hunched, its form shifting and twisting like smoke. It didn't have a face, but I could feel its eyes on me, burning into my soul. And then it spoke, its voice a low, guttural growl. Part 3. The confrontation. The shadow's voice. Echoed in the room, low and guttural, sending a chill down my spine. I tightened my grip on the gun, my hands trembling as I aimed it at the figure in the chair. But the shadow didn't move. It just sat there, its form shifting and twisting like smoke, its faceless gaze fixed on me. Who are you? I demanded, my voice shaking. What do you want? The shadow didn't respond at first. It just tilted its head, as if studying me. And then it spoke again, its voice distorted and echoing. You don't understand. You never will. But you will soon. I didn't know what that meant, but I wasn't about to stick around and find out. I fired the gun, the sound deafening in the small room. The bullet passed right through the shadow, embedding itself in the wall behind it. The shadow didn't flinch. It just laughed, a low, guttural sound that made my skin crawl. You can't hurt me, Alex. Not with that. I backed away, my heart pounding. The shadow stood up, its form towering over me. I could feel its presence, like a weight pressing down on me, suffocating me. I turned and ran, slamming the bedroom door behind me. I didn't stop until I was back in the attic, the suitcase still sitting open on the floor. I needed answers, and I needed them now. I grabbed a stack of letters and started flipping through them, looking for anything that might explain what was happening. One letter caught my eye. It was dated 1947, just a few months before Blackwood Research Facility was shut down. The handwriting was shaky, almost frantic. Thomas, I don't know if this letter will ever reach you, but I have to try. They're closing the project. They say it's too dangerous, that we've gone too far. But they don't understand. We've unlocked something powerful, and now it's too late to stop it. If you're reading this, please come back. I need your help. I can't do this alone. I frowned. Who was Thomas? And what had they unlocked? I flipped through the other letters, but there were no answers, just more pleas for help, more references to something called the entity. And then I found it, a photograph I hadn't noticed before. It was a group of people standing in front of a large machine, its surface covered in strange symbols. Grandma was in the center, her face pale and drawn. The others were blurred, their faces smudged out like in the other photo. But one person stood out, a man in the back, his face clear. He was tall, with dark hair and piercing eyes. And he was holding something in his hand, a small, black box. On the back of the photo, someone had written, "The Entity 1946. We should never have opened the door." I felt a chill run down my spine. The Entity. Was that what the shadow was? And what door had they opened? I didn't have time to think about it. The sound of footsteps echoed from downstairs, growing louder with each passing second. The shadow was coming. I grabbed the suitcase and ran to the window. The attic window led out onto the roof, and from there I could climb down the tree and escape. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay in the house. I climbed out the window, the cold night air biting at my skin. The roof was slippery, and I almost lost my balance, but I managed to make it to the tree. I climbed down as quickly as I could, the suitcase clutched tightly in my hand. When I reached the ground, I looked back at the house. The shadow was standing in the attic window, its form shifting and twisting. It didn't try to follow me. It just watched as I ran into the night. Part 4. The Truth About the Entity. I didn't stop running until I was several blocks away from the house. My heart was pounding, my breath coming in ragged gasps, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the shadow was still watching me. I found a small diner that was still open and slipped inside, the suitcase clutched tightly in my hand. The diner was nearly empty, just a few tired-looking patrons scattered around the room. I took a seat in the corner, away from the windows, and set the suitcase on the table. My hands were still trembling as I opened it and pulled out the letters and photographs. I needed to figure out what was going on. The shadow, the suitcase, Project Erebus, it was all connected, and the key to understanding it was in these documents. I started with the photograph of the group, standing in front of the machine. The man in the back, the one holding the black box, caught my eye again. Who was he, and what was in the box? I flipped through the letters, looking for any mention of him. One letter, dated 1946, stood out. It was addressed to Grandma, and the handwriting was neat and precise. Evelyn, I hope this letter finds you well. The experiments are progressing faster than we anticipated. The entity is responding to stimuli, but I fear we are losing control. The black box is the key, but it is also our greatest risk. If it falls into the wrong hands, the consequences could be catastrophic. We must proceed with caution. The letter was signed Thomas. Thomas, the name from the other letters. He was the man in the photograph, and he was involved in Project Erebus. I pulled out my laptop and started searching for Thomas. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Thomas Carter was a physicist who had worked at Blackwood Research Facility in the 1940s. He was one of the lead researchers on Project Erebus, and he disappeared shortly after the facility was shut down. But there was something else, something that made my blood run cold. Thomas Carter was married to Dr. Evelyn Carter, my grandmother. I leaned back in my seat, my mind racing. Grandma had been married to Thomas Carter, one of the lead researchers on Project Erebus, and she kept a secret from me, from everyone. Why? I needed to find out more. I grabbed my phone and called the only person I could think of who might know something, my mom. She'd always been tight-lipped about Grandma's past, but maybe now she'd be willing to talk. The phone rang a few times before she picked up. Alex? It's late. Is everything okay? No, Mom, it's not, I said, my voice trembling. I need to know about Grandma, about her past, about Thomas Carter. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Alex, what's going on? I found a suitcase in Grandma's attic, I said. It's filled with letters and photographs. And there's something else, something in the house, a shadow. It's been following me, Mom. I need to know what's going on. Another pause, longer this time. Alex, listen to me. You need to stay away from that house. Whatever you found, whatever you think you know, just leave it alone. It's not safe. Mom, please, I said, my voice breaking. I need to know the truth. She sighed, and I could hear the hesitation in her voice. Your grandmother was involved in something dangerous, something she never wanted you to know about. Thomas Carter was her husband, but he wasn't who you think he was. He was obsessed with his work, with Project Erebus, and it cost him everything. What do you mean? I asked, my heart pounding. He opened a door, Alex, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. A door to something that should have stayed closed. And now it's too late to stop it. The line went dead. Part 5, closing the door. The line went dead, and I sat there in the diner, staring at my phone. My mom's words echoed in my mind. He opened a door, Alex. A door to something that should have stayed closed. I didn't know what that meant, but I knew I had to find out. The shadow, the entity, was still out there, and it wasn't going to stop until it got what it wanted. And I had a feeling that what it wanted was me. I grabbed the suitcase and left the diner, the cold night air biting at my skin. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay in one place for too long. The entity was watching, and it was only a matter of time before it found me. I drove aimlessly for a while, my mind racing. I needed to figure out what to do next. The answers were in the suitcase, but I didn't know where to start. And then it hit me, the photograph of the group standing in front of the machine. The black box, that was the key. If I could find it, maybe I could stop the entity. I pulled over and opened the suitcase, spreading the documents out on the passenger seat. I found the photograph and stared at it, trying to make out the details. The machine in the background was covered in strange symbols, and the black box in Thomas's hand was small and unassuming, but there was something about it, something powerful. And then I noticed something I hadn't seen before. On the side of the box was a symbol, a circle with a line through it. It looked familiar, but I couldn't place it. I grabbed my phone and started searching, and it didn't take long to find what I was looking for. The symbol was an alchemical sign, representing a portal or gateway. It was often used in occult practices to denote a connection between worlds. And Thomas had it on the black box. I felt a chill run down my spine. The black box wasn't just a box. It was a gateway, a door, and Thomas had opened it. I needed to find the box. But where? It had been over 70 years since Project Erebus was shut down. The box could be anywhere. And then I remembered the letters. One of them had mentioned a location, a safe house where Thomas had stored some of his research. I flipped through the letters until I found it. The address was scribbled at the bottom of the page, barely legible. It was a long shot, but it was the only lead I had. The safe house was located in the middle of nowhere, about an hour's drive from the city. It was an old, abandoned cabin, surrounded by dense forest. The place looked like it hadn't been touched in decades, the wood rotting and the windows broken. I parked my car and grabbed a suitcase, my heart pounding as I approached the cabin. The door was hanging off its hinges, and the inside was dark and musty. I stepped inside, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The cabin was small, just one room with a fireplace and a few pieces of broken furniture. But in the corner of the room was a metal safe, its surface covered in rust. I knelt down and tried the handle, but it was locked. I set the suitcase down and started looking for the key. It didn't take long to find it. It was hidden in a crack in the wall, just like the letter had said. I inserted the key into the lock and turned it, the safe creaking open. Inside was the black box. It was smaller than I'd expected, about the size of a shoebox, and made of a strange, dark metal that seemed to absorb the light. The symbol was etched into the side, and the surface was covered in intricate carvings, runes maybe, or some kind of ancient script. I reached out to touch it, but as soon as my fingers brushed the surface, a wave of cold washed over me, and I heard it, the whispers. They were faint at first, but they grew louder, more insistent, until they were a deafening roar in my ears. You shouldn't have come here. I turned around, and there it was, the shadow. It was standing in the doorway, its form shifting and twisting like smoke. Its faceless gaze was fixed on me, and I could feel its malice, its hunger. "You can't stop me, Alex," it said, its voice a low, guttural growl. "The door is open, and I am free." I didn't know what to do. The box was in my hands, but I didn't know how to use it. And then I remembered the letters, the ones from Thomas. He'd mentioned a ritual, a way to close the door. But I didn't have time to read them. The shadow was coming closer, its form growing larger, more menacing. I did the only thing I could think of. I slammed the box shut. The effect was immediate. The shadow let out a deafening scream, its form twisting and writhing as it was pulled back into the box. The air around me seemed to vibrate, the walls of the cabin shaking as the shadow was sucked into the box. And then, with a final, ear-splitting scream, it was gone.